By the midpoint of the Second World War, as the battlefields of Europe and the vast expanses of the Eastern Front chewed through men and machines at an industrial scale, one armored vehicle quietly earned a reputation that far exceeded its humble origins, becoming the unsung hero of the German Wehrmacht. The StuG III, a machine that was not a tank in the traditional sense but an assault gun, a turretless, low-slung killing instrument conceived not for glory or sweeping armored charges, but for the gritty, brutal work of supporting infantry at close range, yet destined to evolve into Germany's most prolific and deadliest tank hunter, a weapon that Allied crews came to fear as a phantom lurking in hedgerows, ruins, and forest edges, striking from concealment and vanishing before retaliation could be brought to bear. The StuG III story begins not with dreams of tank duels, but with lessons painfully learned during the First World War, when German infantry assaults were repeatedly slowed and bloodied by enemy machine gun nests and fortified positions that could not be suppressed quickly enough by slow, horse-drawn artillery, prompting forward-thinking officers like General Erich von Manstein to argue for a new form of assault artillery that could move with the infantry and deliver direct, immediate fire against hardened targets. The solution was characteristically pragmatic. Take the proven, mass-produced Panzer III chassis, remove the expensive and mechanically complex turret, and mount the gun in a fixed armored casemate, creating a vehicle that was cheaper, easier to build, lower in profile, and ideally suited to smashing pillboxes and strongpoints. Early versions armed with a short-barreled 75mm howitzer performed this role with brutal efficiency during the invasions of Poland and France, rolling forward alongside infantry and blasting holes through defenses that would have otherwise stalled attacks. But the StuG's destiny shifted dramatically with the launch of Operation Barbarossa, when German forces collided headlong with waves of Soviet T-34s and KV-1s whose armor rendered many existing anti-tank weapons inadequate, forcing German engineers and commanders alike to seek rapid solutions. The StuG III, with its stable chassis and exceptionally low silhouette, proved to be an ideal platform for a high-velocity anti-tank gun, and when it was upgraded with a long-barreled 7.5 cm StuG 40 cannon, the same powerful weapon mounted on later Panzer IVs, the transformation was complete. A vehicle born as infantry support had become a deadly, specialized tank destroyer, capable of killing most Allied armor at combat ranges while presenting a target so small and so well protected from the front that it was notoriously difficult to detect and even harder to defeat. Cheap to manufacture, mechanically simpler than turreted tanks, and devastatingly effective in defensive positions, the StuG III would go on to become the most produced German armored fighting vehicle of the entire war, a testament not only to its combat effectiveness but to the desperate strategic reality Germany faced as it transitioned from offensive blitzkrieg to a grinding defensive struggle. Across the Atlantic, however, the United States arrived at a very different answer to the problem of enemy armor, shaped by its own interpretation of the early war years and the shock of German armored breakthroughs in 1940, giving rise to a unique and controversial doctrine championed by General Leslie J. McNair, the head of Army Ground Forces, who believed firmly that tanks should not fight other tanks and that the task of destroying enemy armor should be handled by a separate, highly mobile force designed specifically for that purpose. From this belief emerged the tank destroyer force, guided by the aggressive motto, "Seek, strike, and destroy," a philosophy that emphasized speed, flexibility, and offensive action over armor protection and defensive staying power. The embodiment of this doctrine was the 3-inch gun motor carriage M10, a vehicle that from its inception was intended to hunt tanks rather than wait for them, and while it shared the robust and reliable chassis of the M4 Sherman, ensuring ease of production and maintenance, it diverged sharply in philosophy, trading thick armor for mobility and mounting a more powerful gun in a distinctive 5-sided open-top turret. The M10's armor was thinner and in many areas less well sloped than that of the Sherman, and its heavy 3-inch M7 gun, derived from an anti-aircraft weapon, required prominent counterweights on the rear of the turret to balance its mass, giving the vehicle its unmistakable silhouette, but its most defining feature remained the open top, a design choice that was neither accidental nor careless but deeply rooted in doctrine. By eliminating the roof, weight was saved, improving speed and agility, but more importantly, commanders gained unmatched situational awareness, able to stand tall, scan the battlefield with binoculars, hear the sounds of engines and gunfire, and maintain a clear sense of the tactical picture without the claustrophobic tunnel vision imposed by a closed turret. In the minds of American planners, for a vehicle whose primary mission was to find and engage enemy armor before it could threaten friendly forces, this awareness was not a luxury but a necessity, and as the British would later nickname it the Wolverine, the M10 became the workhorse of the tank destroyer force, with more than 6,700 examples produced and deployed across multiple theaters of war. When these two machines are compared directly, the contrast in philosophy becomes stark, yet in terms of raw firepower, the matchup is surprisingly even, underscoring the high quality of both designs. Late model StuG III OSF. G vehicles were armed with a 7.5 cm StuG 40L/48, a superb high-velocity cannon capable of penetrating more than 90 mm of armor at a distance of 1,000 meters, making it lethal not only to the M10 but to the Sherman tanks it was based upon, while the M10's 3-inch M7 gun, at the time of its introduction in 1942, was the most powerful anti-tank weapon in the American arsenal, able according to U.S. Army Ordnance data to penetrate approximately 88 mm of armor at the same range. With standard armor-piercing ammunition, and even more with rare hypervelocity rounds. On paper, the guns were nearly equals, each capable of destroying the other under typical combat conditions, resulting in a rare draw in a war where technological mismatches were common, but firepower alone never decided survivability on the battlefield. Here, the StuG III's defensive nature asserted itself forcefully, as later models featured up to 80 mm of well-sloped frontal armor, combined with an extraordinarily low profile, just over 7 feet tall, that made it incredibly difficult to spot and even harder to hit, especially when dug in or positioned behind rubble, embankments, or vegetation. Designed to survive the first shot, the StuG epitomized the philosophy of a weapon intended to hold ground under relentless pressure. The M10, by contrast, was a glass cannon, with a maximum of roughly 57 mm of armor on the gun shield and far less elsewhere, much of it poorly sloped, leaving it highly vulnerable to the StuG's gun, and its open-top turret exposed the crew to shrapnel from artillery airbursts, mortar fire, small arms fire from elevated positions, and close-range infantry attacks. Yet this vulnerability came with a grimly practical advantage. When an M10 was hit and caught fire, its crew could escape almost instantly, leaping clear of the vehicle rather than fumbling through narrow hatches under choking smoke and flames, meaning that while the M10 was more likely to be knocked out, its crew often had a better chance of surviving the destruction of their machine. A small consolation in a war measured in lives as much as territory. In a purely defensive engagement, however, the verdict tilts clearly toward the StuG III, whose armor protection and low silhouette made it far more survivable when lying in wait for an advancing enemy. Everything changes, though, when the question of tactical flexibility is considered, and here the clash of philosophies becomes decisive, centered on one crucial feature: the turret. The StuG III, as a turretless assault gun, had only a narrow arc of fire, roughly 10 degrees to either side, and to engage a target outside this limited traverse, the entire vehicle had to pivot, a slow and often awkward maneuver that exposed its thin side armor and broke its carefully prepared concealment. This made the StuG a master of the prepared ambush but dangerously vulnerable if surprised, outflanked, or forced to react quickly to multiple threats, binding it fundamentally to a defensive role. The M10, on the other hand, despite its manually traverse turret that could take up to 2 exhausting minutes to complete a full 360-degree rotation, possessed an overwhelming advantage in being able to engage targets in any direction without moving the hull, allowing it to stop, fire, and reposition with a speed and flexibility the StuG simply could not match. Combined with the open top and superior situational awareness it afforded, this made the M10 a true hunter-killer, capable of advancing, detecting a hidden StuG, bringing its gun to bear, firing, and then moving on before enemy fire could be effectively returned. Where the StuG waited, the M10 searched. Where the StuG relied on concealment and the first shot, the M10 relied on initiative and maneuver, and in the fluid, combined arms battles fought by the Allies in 1944-1945, this flexibility often proved decisive. In the end, asking which vehicle was superior misses the deeper truth that each was a near-perfect expression of the strategic circumstances and doctrinal beliefs of the nation that built it. In a prepared defensive ambush, where it could choose the ground and strike first, the StuG III was arguably the more dangerous machine, a brilliantly cost-effective predator ideally suited to an army fighting a desperate holding action against overwhelming odds. But the Allies were not fighting a defensive war. They were advancing relentlessly across France, the Low Countries, and into Germany itself, conducting a war of maneuver, exploitation, and constant pressure. For that kind of war, the M10, with its turreted gun, reliable Sherman-based chassis, and aggressive doctrine, was the superior weapon system, not because it was harder to kill, but because it could find, engage, and destroy the enemy on its own terms. The StuG III was the weapon of an army trying to survive. The M10 was the weapon of an army determined to advance, and in the brutal calculus of late-war Europe, the hunter more often than not overcame the ambush predator, leaving one final question hanging in the air for anyone who studies these machines. Would you rather command the better protected but inflexible StuG III, or the more vulnerable but adaptable M10, knowing that in war, survival often depends not just on armor, but on the freedom to act?